Hello and welcome to the Mastermind, Body, and Spirit Show. I'm your host, Matt Belair. Today's guest is the author of Lasting Happiness, The Nature of Religion, and Rotting in Bangkok. I think I messed up that title. What is that? I'm going to interrupt it and ask you, what is the title of the third book?
Rotting in the Bangkok Hilton.
Yes, and I wanted you to say that because I thought the title was so terrible and so interesting. I knew something was cut off from the bio, so I just wanted you to share that right away. Okay, I'm going to continue. Um, he became a gemologist after college, working in the jewelry industry for years. He traveled widely in Europe and Asia, where he lived for over a decade. While living in Northern Thailand, a friend murdered a woman in his house. Fearful of the Thai police, he helped cover it up. When he was caught, he could not pay the bribe the judge and the police demanded and spent the next 16 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. Lasting happiness is the product of that experience, a realization of how little we really need to be happy. Welcome to the show, T.M. Hoy.
Thank you very much, Matt. I'm really happy to, and I'm honored to be a guest on your show.
It's great to have you on the show. When I'm not sure who it was who reached out, I looked at your story and I was like, oh my goodness, that is so crazy. I have traveled Southeast Asia. I've traveled Thailand. And one of the things that some of the travelers would say is we're going to go to the prison because there's a lot of expats. There's a lot of people. Some of them are in those jails for good reason. Some of them are there for not so good a reason or not legit because it's a whole different universe over there. It's very, very intense. And the conditions are super intense. I have no idea firsthand. I just heard stories and I've seen some movies and documentaries. And so, man, what a crazy experience that must have been. Why don't you just give the listeners a little bit of your background and what you're up to today, and we'll get into your books and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, great. Thank you, Matt. As far as my background, pretty straightforward. I was raised in an upper middle class home in Northern California and moved to Southern California when I was a teenager. Both of my parents were educators. Dad was a superintendent of school districts. Mom was principal, high school. And most people in my family are professional folks. And I went through the college routine and kind of decided that I was enjoying jewelry more. So I went into jewelry, became a gemologist, worked in that industry. And part of that was traveling overseas to buy gemstones and then set them in jewelry and sell that. And that's how I ended up in Thailand. I traveled extensively in Asia and then also in Europe. And the problem, of course, with Thailand is that the society itself is rather corrupt. And the police behave kind of like a mafia. And what happened was I had a friend that I was responsible for him. I was a fiscal conservator. And he was always getting in arguments with my girlfriend. And they had a terrible argument one day. I was out of town, and he strangled her. So I come back to my house, and this happened in the morning, and I come back in the evening and discover that this has occurred. So I wasn't really thinking all that clearly. I began drinking, and I was terrified of the police. And make a long story short, rather than go to the police and risk torture, I said, all right, I'll help you cover it up. And that decision cost me 16 years of my life. But along that journey, from that experience, which really was more about me facing myself and facing death on a daily basis. And from that emerged some really profound truths. For many, many people, when they go through that experience of Thai prison or any foreign prison, a lot of them become drug addicts because drugs are cheap and easily available in Southeast Asian prisons. And a lot of people go crazy and a lot of people die. But if you're willing to really look inside yourself, if you're willing to challenge who you are, and I was not a person that I was proud of being. I was not a good person. And that experience kind of shook me to my foundations, and it strips everything away from you because there's nothing left. It's just you and reality, and there is nothing between you. And if you dare to look at yourself at that point, if you really can, there's a clarity that comes from that. And what I learned at that point was quite simple, that we really need very little to be happy. That happiness emerges from our relationships with each other, with yourself primarily. And that insight led me down a very different pathway, and ultimately to the book, Lasting Happiness. So that's kind of a background. What I'm doing right now, I guess, if you know, everybody likes to describe themselves. I'd say that I'm just an author. I'm a survivor, and I'm somebody that's working hard to change the world. And I'm a director, one of the directors of a charity called speakingfromtheheart.org. And what it does is we're trying to help teach people how to walk the path with heart, how to find that path and walk it. And the path with heart, in its simplest terms, is when you find what you love and what is your great passion, and you marry that with your values and your visions. And that is the path that I think makes a life worth living. So that kind of is a summary of my story, I guess.
Holy moly, man. Well, you glossed over 16 years, but what an incredible experience that must have been. And I can't even imagine how challenging that would be. And I'm glad when I was reading the intro, something had got cut off, because I knew it was like the Bangkok Hilton, which is a hilarious name for what would have been an absolutely awful experience. I can only imagine. So I guess let's dive in a little bit there, because your first book is talking about some of that experience, and then building in the relationship yourself, and what you realized, when you're talking, it reminds me a little bit of Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And it also reminds me of Into the Wild, which people kind of come to the same ideas. And I think in personal development and self-help, we come to those ideas, relationship to the self. How do we improve that? So I guess my first question is, going through that experience in the prison, like, can you describe, maybe not in detail, like how hard it was? Because you said something where you were talking about facing death on a daily basis. And I've had several near-death experiences. And the only thing that I'm doing close right now is doing night training, where I go to the scariest place that I can find in the forest. I've been doing this for the last couple of years, of just going into dark forests and just being afraid of it. And it's kind of like that in a little bit. Yours would be way more magnified. And in doing that, I am getting insights and experiences and perspectives of just by being afraid and immersing myself in that. So can you describe a little bit what daily life was like, and like what it means to be facing death on a daily basis? And then how did you get to the space where, because you probably didn't start out too happy, how did it begin to transition and come to a space where you could be in that environment and somehow be happy? I'm so curious.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the easiest way to describe it would be as, imagine, if you will, being trapped in a giant stone box or a concrete box. And the water generally was drained directly from really polluted rivers. So the water was very dangerous. It was filled with all kinds of chemicals, dead animals, just nasty stuff. And so you had to strain and boil the water to drink it. And you had to pay bribes for everything, because what they gave you for food wasn't really food. Even the feral cats that inhabited the prison wouldn't eat it. And it actually would kill people sometimes. The Thais would take the rice that was given to them, which was a kind of really coarse rice, and they'd reboil it and cook it again. But even having done that, still the rice was so tough that oftentimes as it went through your intestines, it would poke holes in your intestine. And what happens is you develop a disease called peritonitis, which is where basically all the nasty stuff in your guts leaks out into your stomach cavity, and you bloat up, and then it crushes your internal organs, and it's a horrible death. And I watched a lot of people die from that. So you can't eat the food, you have to pay bribes. You can't drink the water, you got to pay bribes to get water. Your daily life is surrounded by people that are either junkies or slaves, because the Thais would take people and force them into slave labor. And death was constant because there were so many diseases, and they had no medicines because they didn't have any money to pay for them. So people were dying from tuberculosis. People were dying from AIDS. People were dying from starvation. People were dying from peritonitis. People would, you get a cut on your face, and if you don't have money for antibiotics, your face is going to swell up. That was one near-death rush I had. I cut myself shaving, and right before the holiday season of the New Year, there, the Songkran Festival, which is held in the spring, everybody leaves, and there are no police there. There are no guards. There's just what are called blue boys, which are trustees running the prison. And so there was no one to bribe to go get antibiotics. And my face swelled up like a pumpkin. And I thought for sure I was done just from a shaving cut with dirty water. And I ended up surviving that. They got back in time, thank God, and I got antibiotics. But to get back to the daily routine, so that was the circumstances. There was violence there, not that much, but there were gambling debts, there were drug debts, and an explosive fury would sometimes grip people because there was no one there to take their rage out on, and so they'd just kill each other sometimes. And so that's what I was surrounded by. And you mentioned going into the forest to experience fear and all that. One thing I think would be a really valuable experience for you and for anyone would simply be to go to places where people are dying. And this is like a cancer ward at a hospital, maybe volunteer at an old age home, and just spend a little time with people who are right there at the door. Because what that does is that gives you that sense of just how precious our mortality is and just how precious life is. And it puts things in real clarity. It will clarify your values and your vision. And it isn't so much a fear thing as it is an understanding of the fact that we will die. And we are very good at ignoring that or putting that aside in our minds. If you face it clearly, it can be transformative. But so that kind of is an overview.
Yeah, man. Well, holy crap. I'm just imagining it because again, I was there, I've been to those countries and I heard some stories. So I'm kind of putting myself in the front row seat. When you're in this like place, right, and you're experiencing all these different things, it's so easy in our society to become addicted to, drugs are a huge problem. People are addicted to all different types of things. People are addicted to social media now. They're addicted to, their ego and like how we're perceived and all that kind of fun stuff. We're addicted to opiates. Kids are getting all messed up. So what for you, like, was it easy to like find strength to like not want to numb yourself? I feel like I don't even know if I would be strong enough for that experience. I feel like I'm pretty strong mentally, but holy crap, man, like that's what you only know once you're in it. And I think it's like something like war in the army and stuff like that. And a lot of different things is like, you don't know what you're made of until you're faced with that. Are you going to cave? Are you going to look for a way out? And I think that in our society, we look to numb a lot. And so can you talk about, like, was it a turning point or anything that had happened where you kind of switched to happiness, like an insight or an epiphany or an experience where like you're facing this on a daily basis and you get to the place where you can actually be content in that experience? Like,
Sure. I think, before I reached that point, I nearly died several times in Northern Thai prison because the conditions were so terrible. And each time that happened, I grew closer and closer and closer to kind of like a spiritual feeling and understanding, because I realized that death is not the end, that there is something that survives, some kind of consciousness survives. I just felt that very, very strongly. And for example, the first time I almost died was because the guards found out that there was only one thing I could eat that they had available, which was these banana bread muffins that the Thai Chinese prisoners were smuggling in. And so the guards were like, we can pressure this guy. We can get, the money out of him. And so they cut off the muffin supply. They told the Chinese, don't bring those in. Don't sell those to him. And so I went 2 weeks without food. And I got very close to death at that point, because the radical change of, the long period where I'm eating very poorly and then no food at all. And so what happened was the veil kind of becomes thin. And I realized that, I don't know, it was a very strange experience, but it was like an understanding that I knew that this world is not it's almost like a quantum mechanics type thing that you get from physics, where you understand that reality is not the solid thing that we believe it to be, that it is much more tentative, and that there is a different reality, and that it is very close to us, but that we very rarely touch it or get in touch with it. And that was one of the first experiences. But I had several other ones, and each one kind of led me a little bit closer. Each time I kind of brushed death and got more familiar with it, it became less threatening. And the turning point, I think, happened on the trip down from Northern Thai prison to Bangkok. And what happened was I was in a van with one of the Hill Tribe people. And the Hill Tribe guys are fascinating people. They have never experienced anything like civilization. Most of them have never seen a car or concrete or electricity. They live in the forests in Northern Thailand. And the thing about the Hill Tribe people is most of them don't even speak Thai. They speak English because of the tourists that visit them on elephant treks, but they don't speak Thai generally. And they're wonderful people. They're so generous and kind and giving. And this guy didn't even know what his sentence was. He didn't even understand really what his sentence was for. So I read his court papers, because I could struggle through Thai, and I explained to him that he had a life sentence, which for the Hill Tribe people means that you're cut off from all your social circle because they're all illiterate. They don't speak or read or write. I mean, they can speak their own language in English brokenly, but they don't read and write in a way that they could communicate with each other. And family is everything there. And so basically what the news I was giving him was that he was cut off forever from the people that he loved and would spend the rest of his life in prison far, far away. And his response was, he was concerned for me because I was obviously so deeply upset by this. And he was like, it's okay. It's all right. And he pointed at the sky and it was like, look, the sun's still shining. It's okay. Don't trip. And that was so amazing to me, that here I am with this guy that just received this unbelievably horrible news. And his response was, I'm concerned for you. Are you okay? Are you going to be all right with this? And I realized I had an epiphany at that point that, wow, that there is this, it was just incredible to be confronted with somebody who was so stoic and so at peace and so content with themselves, and that they were able to rise above that without even blinking an eye, and that they were cool, and that life goes on. It's going to be okay. And at that point, I really had to question my values and my ideas about reality, because I'm like, wow, this guy is just light years beyond anything that I've ever experienced. And he's just a Hill Tribes guy. And that was really a turning point for me.
Holy crap, man. I can't even imagine that. The closest thing I can even relate to is when I was in Nepal and I was meditating with monks, and I wanted to learn more about Buddhism and wanted to be enlightened and all that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And when I would have conversations. I was teaching English in the morning, and I was having conversations with older monks at night because they wanted to practice their English. I was learning about Buddhism and philosophy and asking them questions, and we were having great conversations. And I would always ask them really difficult questions. And one of those questions, I was like, well, what if somebody rapes and kills my sister? If they do that and I figure out who that is, my immediate reaction is going to be to want to harm that person. That is exactly the thing I'm going to want to do. I don't know if I'll do it. I probably won't, because I don't want the repercussions, but that's what I'm going to want to do. So if we're faced with something like that, what would you do? What would you recommend or suggest? And he took a pause, and I love the Buddhism, and in Nepal anyway, because there's different types of Buddhism, but especially with the Tibetan monks in Nepal, no matter who I got and was spoke to, they always really listened to the question and then answered, and they would all answer congruent, but they would always think, and they would ponder, and they would give such beautiful responses. Nothing was like automatic or very set, it was very real. So after about a 2-minute silence, he looks at me and he says, that would be an awful experience. And I don't wish that experience upon anyone. And if that happened to be to me, it would be my job to figure out a way to show that person love and compassion. He didn't say I was going to do it. He didn't say I will do it. He would just say I would try to do that. And then in your story, the guy is receiving this news and is immediately doesn't even phase him. And it's so interesting what you're saying about where he comes from, the Hill tribe. I've been trying to learn a lot more about Native American and indigenous cultures. I have a mentor, David Lombert, who I speak about a lot, and now I'm meeting more Native Americans, learning about their history, learning about their way of life, learning about the history. It's so fascinating. And I'm reminded of another story. When I went down to the Mayan fire ceremony in Guatemala. One of the elders there, Carlos Barrios, was telling me the story about how he had created an elders gathering in like 95 or 2005, and everybody came, and he said one of these elders, he became like the favorite guy, and he was so much fun and such a good dude. Apparently this guy lived in the forest, no water, no, like exactly like you're talking about. And so when he had a shower at Carlos's house, he's like, this water's dead. And he went and found other water and showered and then came back. And what a different way of life that would be. What a different experience. What a connection with spirit, right? Nature is spirit. And how powerful would that be? It would be, we would have no understanding. And that's the relationship with, universe, spirit, God, nature, source. So unbelievable stuff. I could kind of continue, but I'm so curious. I want you to either add on to that. And my other two follow-up questions would be, did you keep in touch with this guy and learn more from him and see how his experience went and if he was able to maintain that type of philosophy? And do you have any other stories like that? Any very powerful stories that were transformational or anything similar like that? Because that was amazing.
Thank you. Unfortunately, no. We were separated when we reached Bangkok, and so I don't know what happened to him. I know that very often the Hill tribe people often die of homesickness, and they just decide that they're going to leave their body, and they leave their spirit goes. They don't usually live very long. It varies quite a bit, of course, but that's the average. But no, unfortunately, I lost touch with him. But as far as other experiences, absolutely, I had some amazing things happen while I was there. There was a very dear friend of mine. He's from Austria, and was like a brother to me, Thomas Kartner. But Tom, he goes by Tom. And we were studying shamanism together. And I don't know, are you familiar with the book, The Urban Shaman by Kahili King?
It sounds familiar, but I can't say I know for sure.
If you ever get a chance, get your hands on a copy. I think you'd enjoy it. Well, we were studying and going through the phases. And that the book recommends. And it's based on Hawaiian shamanism. It's very light, very peaceful, very positive, a wonderful book. And from that emerged some very, very strange experiences about reality. I'm trying to think of one that would be representative. Well, I'll tell you one that's in this, that's a story that's in the book, Rotting in the Bangkok Hilton, which is just a series of stories actually that I experienced there. We were also reading the books by Carlos Castaneda, the Don Juan series. You're familiar with those, right? Okay. One of the books is called The Journey to Ixtlan, which is about a journey to an imaginary city that doesn't really exist. And we were in a field that's right by the front gate where all these people are coming and going all day long. And we sat there and we're talking, and we were smoking a little bit of really, really good Thai stick. And we began meditating and imagining and visualizing that journey to Ixtlan. And we sat and just chatted and just relaxed through the whole day. And we watched people run up and down and we're like, I have to give you an idea. This is from where we sat on the lawn to the path was where people walked in and out of the prison was about 4 feet away. And the other side, the entire width of the prison of these buildings is only about 150 feet. And so there's people coming in and out of this building all day long, hundreds. The prison building itself that we were in held about 1,000 people. And so we're sitting right there, right in front of the guard shack the whole day, just chatting, relaxing, and smoking a little Thai stick, imagining the journey to Ixtlan. Okay, so the end of the day comes, everybody's getting ready to be locked away at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We go and get our shower. And the other people that we shared our little cubicle area with were freaking out because they had been trying to find us the entire day. And they said, "Where were you guys? We looked everywhere for you. The missionaries were here. They dropped off supplies, blah, 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 blah." And unbelievably, that imaginary journey that we took to Ixtlan, we were invisible. We had people walking 4 feet away from us. We watched them walk up and down, and they didn't see us. And that was amazing. And it was just one example of how powerful shamanism can be and just how strange reality is. And so it was incredible. That was a very incredible experience to know that we'd experienced invisibility, which is so peculiar because it was completely relaxed and effortless. And so much of shamanism is like that, where you have to approach it in the right frame of mind, but reality is just not what we think it is. I know that's not very emotionally moving, but it was, it happened, and there was a lot of other strange things like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, what it reminds me of is the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats, and I put on my like quantum physics hat and hear of
Uh-huh.
all these really interesting stories and interesting theories. And the thing that I think that you said that's important is like you were fully immersed in this experience, so that's
Mhm.
the reality that you were focused on, and maybe it was so intense at that point where you almost become invisible. And even looking at like magic and Darren Brown and things like that, and how like you're so engaged in something else. It's like shutting off almost maybe all those other like radar pieces that we pick up consciously. It's just like shutting them down where you're totally in your own space. They're
Yeah,
seeing you, but they're not seeing you. You know what I mean? It's just
right.
like this, whatever's being created by you is much more important than anybody else wanting you to be roped into your reality. And
Right.
so, that's where things can get a little bit squirrely. And, you touched on a lot of things with your near death experience as well, and getting closer and closer to like the veil and of the other side and thinning. And I think that's a really important point for people, is to understand that life isn't when you die, it's not done. And I think that that's what so many people are afraid of. For me, I know it in my bones and in my cell, but maybe nothing happens, but I have like almost zero doubt. Like I've had that experience a few times where, facing death in my experiences doing that, and also some meditative experiences or life experiences where it's like this energy or this force or this
Mhm.
experience or this awareness that is so far beyond anything you could imagine that
Mhm.
you just know that there is this other thing, and it
Mhm.
gives you a little bit of a sense of peace. And so now what I'd like to ask is, I'm curious about what your advice is to be happy, to have lasting happiness, because in our culture, in our society, it's always kind of like a get more, do more, be more. And
Mhm.
people have terrible self-worth. They have terrible self-esteem. They're always looking to acquire. We're really stuck on a lot of materialism and gaining, and there's never enough. And
Mhm.
we're always looking at half empty, it seems, in a society basis. So, and it can be hard to change. So what would you recommend to people to just experiencing real and genuine happiness on a daily basis, regardless of what their circumstances are? Because, when you do the comparison test, I was like, all right, I was in a Thailand prison and was able to be content. Can you be content as a middle class? And maybe you got a few bills to pay, because we all do. But
Right.
like the friend you met from the hill tribe, like the sun is shining. There is a big picture, and we tend to focus on those negative things. I do anyway, a lot. And I know that a lot of the people I talk to kind of have that habitual thing too, is to look at what we don't have. Or I'm not looking at the house that I'm in and the car that I'm driving right now. You know what I mean? And I'm fine now. I'm stressed about all these other things that may or may not happen, probably won't happen. But I can stress about them all day and ruin this one. So maybe you can speak on that a little bit.
Absolutely. I'd love to. I think that people need to realize that happiness doesn't come from wealth. It doesn't come from power. It doesn't come from status. It doesn't come from fame. It doesn't come from beauty. It doesn't come from youth. All the things that our society puts out there as being valuable contribute almost nothing to happiness. Anybody that looks at the lives of the celebrities will instantly see that this is true. If you look at how many unhappy, wealthy people there are, how many unhappy celebrities there are, and people know this, people sense this. Happiness comes when your relationships with yourself and with others are healthy and nurturing. That's where it comes from. And it begins with your relationship with yourself, which is also very, very, very simple. It's not that difficult. You need to pause. You need to really examine your values and your vision, and then move forward and act on those. If you can do that, if you can pause and listen to the inner voice, which we all have, you can do this. You can find happiness, because happiness comes when you forgive yourself and you really actually come to love yourself. And doing that, and I give all the tools and techniques in the book for how you do this, all really the latest science, all the latest technology, the best stuff out of medicine and science and so forth. It took me 12 years of research to find all these tools and techniques. But the essence of it is very simple, and that is simply to slow down and listen to your intuition, listen to that inner voice again, and realize that what matters to you, what really matters, what's really important, often has nothing to do with what you're doing on a daily basis. The things that really matter, your life goals, the things that you care about, the things that are the most important to you, often receive the least attention. And if you can shift your focus to where you're focusing on the things that really matter to you, you do the things that you love, you do the things you're passionate about, and you surround yourself with the people you respect and love and care for. And if you do that, you have a radical shift. And now, regardless of what your financial situation is, regardless of what other things are happening in your life, happiness begins to emerge, because you're healing your relationship with yourself, you're healing your relationship with others, and that's what leads to lasting happiness. And if anybody thinks about it just for a moment, you realize that look, think about when you're happiest. You're happiest when you're doing something that you're passionate about, that you love. You're happiest when you're surrounded with people you love and respect. That's when you're happy. And that is what is lasting happiness, is healthy, nurturing relationships, starting with the one with yourself. And again, has nothing to do with financial circumstances. I think if you look around the world, the happiest people tend to be those that have really strong connections and strong networks of friends and loved ones. And material things, once you get past, you have to have your basic needs met, of course, that's standard. But once you get past the basic needs, wealth has almost no impact at all on real happiness.
That's a beautiful answer. And I agree with that. I feel the same way. One of the examples that I share and think about is the average individual in our culture, in our society. We need money to survive. There's no doubt about that. We're figuring that out. Pretty much most of the world is upper or middle middle or lower class. Everybody needs more money. Most. Some people have so much money and they're still unhappy. That's not the thing. But a lot of people would like more, say that's the thing. But the thing that I'd like for people to consider is the idea that, you go about your week or your month or your year and you're doing this job and you're doing this task and you do it over and over and over again for weeks, for months, for years, and sometimes a lifetime. And you put 100% of your time to acquiring enough money for safety and security, which in your mind is never enough. And you don't dedicate any time to what you're passionate about, what you want to learn about, how do you want to experience life? What's your bucket list? What's most important to you? What are your values? All of those really, really important questions about living. And so I invite people to just consider, even if you could do 10%, you know what I mean? You want to work 60 hours a week, just make sure that now you start adding 10%, and then over time, maybe 15, and then next month, 20%, and then 30%. If you're working 9 to 5, you got time after to read a book or do piano or do some art or learn about something or engage your mind. And the other thing I like for people to consider is that, your dreams in your life is a long game. You know,
Mhm.
you've got your whole life to create that thing. So be grateful for the job you have. Just don't drop your dreams completely. Don't drop the things that you're passionate about completely. And it seems that, you know, it's like we get weighed down by this weight of culture. It's like, oh, well, you know what I mean? That was old. I can't think about what I would like to do, or, you know, who I am. It's like, these are important things. I feel like people are just, you know, dropping. And so when you
Mhm.
say it's like, it gives the least attention for sure. And sometimes, you know, it's no attention at all. And
Mhm.
so what I'm curious about, something that I feel like I try to improve, and I think that people experience, is like, how do we be happy with where we are in the process, or with what we have, without changing anything in the external circumstance? And so, you know, for me, it might be like, oh, you know, when I have financial security and I know that all the bills are paid and I have this car or whatever, and I can travel around more, then I'll be happy. Or, you know, a lot of the time when I was younger, I was like, oh, when I read this book, then I'll have more of an idea of what an enlightenment is, and I'll be happier. When I read these 30 books and I do these 30 personal development courses on happiness, then I'll be happy. Now, it's helped for sure, but it seems like we're always trying to change our environment in some way to then be happy, when you were in an environment where you are not changing that, and it
Mhm.
is terrible. And so what do you recommend to get to that kind of space, or that idea to feel it genuinely? And I'll just leave with that one.
Okay. It's pretty straight. It's really straightforward, Matt. And I think that people, if they can just pause, you know, and listen to that inner voice again, I go back to this inner journey. Um, and what it really boils down to is you really have to have a dialogue with yourself, the deep part of yourself. You have to open that conversation up with a part of yourself that's wordless. It doesn't use words. It's the part of us that dreams, and the part of us that uses images and visions. And so you have to be kind of gentle, because this part of ourself we tend to abuse, especially in the West, where we're not on good terms with our inner self. We're not on good terms with our intuition. And so if you pause and you open a conversation with that dreaming self, and you kind of, you know, let it takes a little bit of time and it takes some patience. But ultimately, what will happen is that you open a conversation with this part of yourself, and you come to the realization that it's not that difficult, that what needs to change is you have to listen to the part that's still wild. You have to have a relationship with that part of yourself that's still wild. And when you do that, now your intuition will begin to guide you. Because what a lot of people don't realize is that our consciousness, we're so focused on this in the West, especially, that our consciousness and our rational mind is in control. And that's what has to rule the day. But in reality, our lives are governed by the largest part of our brain, which is emotional. And these parts of our brain, the brain is like a layer cake. The lowest layer we share with reptiles, with lizards and fish. And this is the part of consciousness that is what you might call primal. And built on top of that is what you might call the mammalian brain, which is primarily emotion. And then the tiny little layer on top, which where we get rationality from, is the neocortex. But the neocortex isn't running the show. The mammalian brain and the lizard brain is running the show. And those are moved only by emotion. And you have to open a conversation with that part of yourself, because what happens with your life as you're going through your life, you're experiencing life, and a lot of people are dragged along kicking and screaming with choices they're not really happy about. The relationships are not good. There's problems on every side, and it's just a never-ending, you know, drama storm, if you will. And people, uh, it seems complicated and it seems difficult, but in reality, it's really not. It's about opening a conversation with your inner self. And when you've done that and you begin to listen, and that's very difficult for us, we don't like to listen. We want to be in charge. We want to be in control. And you have to let go of that. And the ego thing too, just let go of that for a while. Let go of all of these messages that are being beamed at you constantly by society, by all these people in authority, by loved ones. Just let it go and open that conversation, have that conversation, and understand what really matters to you and what you love, and be kind to yourself this way. And when you do that, okay, things start flowing a little bit and things are a little bit smoother. And ultimately, you come to a point where you're at peace with yourself and you accept yourself. And ultimately, you learn to love yourself. You forgive yourself for the things you've done. And then finally, you can extend that to others. And that's when love begins flowing in your life. And that's what really matters, is you want to have a life that's filled with love and life and laughter. And that is what matters, and that's what makes a happy life. And it starts with just having that inner conversation, which is so difficult for us here, especially in the United States, because there's no room in our day for having an inner conversation. So for the average person who's listening, I would suggest set aside 5 minutes before you go to bed and just do nothing but maybe a simple breathing exercise where you count your breaths, and just allow a little bit of calmness into your day at the very end. And do that on a regular basis. And what you'll find is that you enjoy that so much that it begins to expand a little bit. And then it goes from 5 minutes to maybe 15, and then half an hour. And when you're in that state, that's where the conversation can begin with your inner self. And that's where the healing can begin. And I would say that's the road that leads ultimately to where you do create a happy existence, which again, once the bills are paid, you don't need a lot. What you need are people you care about and love. And that's what matters. What matters is to have a healthy relationship with yourself where you're not trapped in your mind. And the only way to unlock that door is to have that conversation with a part of yourself that actually governs your day-to-day life, the part that really does run things, and that we so often try to order around but kind of ignores us, really.
Yeah, I think that's very well put. And I like what you talked about it. I never really thought about it like that. Is just, the emotional side of us is actually the largest side, of the brain, and that's what's running things. And the idea to pause and to go within and to engage in that conversation with yourself and figure out what's most important. And some people will talk about inner child work or things like that. Well, we're all children. It's interesting that we will just carry the same thing forever. And another idea that I heard, I don't know if I heard this, but it's been coming up a lot lately, but in my own mind, I wrote it down. I'm pretty sure I wasn't the original one on this, but it's like defining. So a lot of people, I think, define themselves by their worst mistakes. If they're a compassionate and they're a good person, they think about that mistake and they repeat it over. And that's, they're just going to let that guilt and shame or whatever from that experience stay there and just define themselves by whatever that experience is and don't allow themselves to move on. And so just by quieting the mind and opening that conversation, that's how you develop the intuition that you're talking about. That's how you start to just guide your life in a little bit of a different way to add another view, because culturally, the logical brain and the way that it works, it actually can be manipulated. And so if you don't think so, do not think of a pink elephant. And that's how the logical mind works. It's more rigid. It has a different operating system, and you can use fear tactics to make that thing want to stay in a box and not want to go outside the lines. I just saw this really great example on a YouTube video or something where it said, it was an IQ test. Oh, I think it was a Denzel Washington talk I just saw come up, and he's like, there's an IQ test where they'd say, draw 5 lines, on these dots, right? And the only way you could do it is to draw outside the line.
Right.
And I'd never even thought about that. And I was like, son of a gun, you know what I mean? I didn't try it, but I was like, oh, I would think that I'd have to stay inside that line. And I saw another example on YouTube of, this insect, and a person was drawing a circle and the insect wouldn't go outside the circle. Then he would draw a shorter circle and the insect wouldn't go outside that, and it just closed and closed. And how it just makes you think, how much of your beliefs are holding you where you are, how much of how you think and how you operate is holding you. And if you're having that feeling, how do you break out of those beliefs? That's one of the things that I love. I know we talked a little bit before the show, and I'd love to hear your advice on it. And
Mhm.
how do we understand what our limiting beliefs are, and then move towards the most empowering beliefs, and what are they? And maybe this question is one and the same, but in researching your tools and techniques, what is like your number one or two or three or whatever you want to share that you
Mhm.
feel is most impactful for somebody to like, I want to start doing this, open up this dialogue, please give me like a tool or a resource to get started?
Of course, absolutely. So, um, there's actually a bundle there to deal with. So, I think I'd like to start with um, the three main things that control us in most societies, actually. Um, you might call the big one that governs daily life the social game, where the incentives and disincentives that society puts out there for us to kind of follow along and accept society's definition of what's good and important ahead of what really matters to us. That you might call external controls or the social game. Then there are ideas and belief systems, and these also control us. And there's many, there's thousands and thousands of them. The most, like one of the biggest ones, is money. It's a purely imaginary concept. Its only value is what humans assign to it. It has no reality or external value. Uh, a piece of paper in a forest is just that. It's a piece of paper. You bring it into human society. Oh, now it's a dollar bill that can purchase a good or a service. But it's nothing more than an idea, a construct. And the same thing is true with time itself. We have this belief and we all adhere to it. And so we follow these rigid schedules and so on and so forth. But without getting bogged down in that, those ideas and belief systems, they're also very limiting and painful. And then finally, there are the internal controls that we internalize from children on and through adulthood. And it's like obedience training. And this is our self-image and also our unconscious or shadow self. All of these things have very, very strong controls over us. And so for the average person looking to break free, I would start with the things that are most painful, the things that are the most uncomfortable in your life. What are the things that you dislike the most about your life? And just spend a little bit of time. And again, this is where that inner conversation begins. And just think about it and say, wait a minute, what is that pain? What is the source of that pain? And almost always, it's a belief that we've accepted without questioning that's wrong. And, you know, a good example would be, for example, for many people, where they feel that they're pressured, that they have no time, that time is this rigid, horrible thing that's dragging them along, and they constantly have to do this and that and the other thing. And they just need to realize that the only force, the only aspect of time that's real is what they themselves ascribe to it. Time doesn't really exist. You could, if you had unlimited wealth, for example, let's just say in the West, you could throw away your watches, right? You could throw away your clocks because time doesn't matter. You would decide when you wanted to eat, when you wanted to sleep, when you wanted to go someplace. Okay, you have that power now. You don't need unlimited wealth. You can decide what you want to spend your time on. Now, most of us have made choices that lead to this rigid schedule. But if you could just drop that for just a moment, you realize just how freeing that concept can be, where you say, you know what? I'm not going to let all these external demands eat up my day. I'm going to decide what's important. I'm going to reprioritize my time. And that's just a beginning step. So whatever it is that bothers you the most about your life, trace it all the way back. And almost always you're going to find a belief or an idea structure there that is forcing you to do something that you've accepted without question. But in reality, you have the choice of whether or not to follow that. The same thing is true with your self-image. And this is especially true for women who are constantly bombarded with terrible demands, and the fashion industry and beauty and makeup and all this stuff, and because they're targeted for that. And so their self-image is constantly being attacked. If you don't have this particular look, if you don't have this particular shape, if you don't have this particular makeup or perfume or whatever, you're not going to be beautiful or great. So if you really dig down a little bit and realize that your self-image, you're accepting these values, you're accepting this message that's being beamed at you that, oh, I need to be skinny. Oh, I need to be beautiful. Oh, I need to have this. I need to have that. In reality, that's some marketing advertiser's idea that they're beaming at you, and you're accepting. And you're trying to change your whole life to fit what this marketer thinks you should do. But you don't have to do that. You can choose, you know what? I don't care what they think. I could care. You have to reach that point where you can say, you know what? What matters is what I think is important. What matters is what I think has value. To hell with all that other stuff. And just, I'm going to ignore it. And I'm going to move forward on the basis of what matters to me. And so you need to look at those things that are most painful to you and trace them to their source, and then really give it a good hard questioning and try and decide and say, is this something that is important to me? Is this something that has value? Is this something that I should follow? Or is this really bad advice? Is my life being lived according to somebody else's dream? So that would be that's the beginning. That's the beginning steps. And very quickly, once you begin this process, the scales kind of fall from your eyes, and you realize just how much of your life is controlled externally and is controlled by self-image that's negative, is controlled by ideas that are painful to you, values that you don't hold, that are not true. Society is cruel. Society is unjust. Most people are losers in society. That's the way it's designed. And they're defined that way. And so when you step back and you say, I'm not going to play that game, I'm not going to accept those values, that's not what's going to run my life, you're opening the door from that prison to freedom. And you're able to step free of that and recreate a life that is valuable and is meaningful for you. It's not as difficult as we would think it is. It really just requires pausing and a true examination of where your head's at and where your life is at, and having the strength and courage to follow through once you realize what it is that is important, and just how painful life is for so many people because they accept without question the values that have been imposed on them.
Yeah, man, those are fantastic examples and insights. And what I think about is the idea, like an increased quality of consciousness or enlightenment or whatever you want to call it. You know what I mean? I used to, when I was younger, I was like, yeah, I'm going to read all these books on enlightenment and read Zen and go to meditate with monks and become a Zen master, meditate for thousands of hours or whatever. And then I'll have this consciousness where I'm floating around on a cloud and everything is hunky dory and it's going to be the best. Hasn't happened yet. Still trying. And
Right.
the idea, I think, that with what you're speaking about is, when we start to define our values, when we start to look in, when we start to ask ourselves really important questions about who we are, how we want to experience life, what we want to do here, it's more of a process of letting go than acquisition. We're in this mindset right now of acquire more, fit into these different molds. And all of these are external agendas, whether it's coming from media and it's like you want to look a certain way, from the fitness industry. Now we've got the self-help wellness industry, which I'm definitely a part of. And I've also noticed there's a lot more, let's say, what do you call it? Like shiny things, like bells and whistles that don't need to be there. You know what I mean? I was on a podcast today, the University of Adversity with Lance. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. It's a weird one, SEOs or something like that. It's interesting. I was thinking about this example because, we're in this culture of now biohacking and the quick fix to enlightenment, quick fix for this, quick fix for your life purpose, all that kind of thing. And I'm
Right.
looking for those things. I think strategies are good, and I think we
Uh-huh.
should look for them. And there's also hard work. And so I gave him the example of training with the Shaolin monks when I was in China. And
Uh-huh.
at this one point, we do this run on Fridays, and we'd run up and down these steps, and it was like steps and trail and steps and trail up in the mountains, as many as we could do for a time period. I think it was an hour or two.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes people would bear crawl down, right? And so I
Mm-hmm.
decided to bear crawl down this one time. And right at the first quarter, I was only going to do a little bit because it's hard and it hurts your
Mm-hmm.
hands. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's a seafood that's waiting there, and he turns around and he starts following me. I was like, oh shoot. So I end up going, like, I'm already tired. I keep pushing. He's just walking beside me. I'm toast. He grabs this stick that's in the forest, and he just starts, every time I flop down, he's hit me with this stick. You know what I mean? I end up going like 5 times as far as I could imagine. I went right down to the bottom, and I never ever would have accomplished that if he didn't give me the physical motivation and kind of a supportive but also hard way. But it showed like what I was capable of within my own body. And no like biohacking or shirt you're gonna wear or like crystal or meditation is gonna help that. We have good processes that help, but it's also showing up. You know what I mean? It's also like
Mm-hmm.
very grounded and very real. And what you're suggesting is very grounded and very real. And just like, okay, we do want to get to these spaces. We need to get clear and define that. A lot of it might be, okay, you know what? It's not so much about the image. These things are less important than I thought, or I need to learn to let those ideas go. So maybe you make a little less money and do what you love. One of the examples, I'll give is like when I was snowboarding in Whistler. What I wanted to do most at that time in my life was snowboard. And I figured out a way to snowboard 130 days a year at one of
Oh,
the best
awesome.
resorts. And it was amazing. And I wouldn't trade that for anything. And
Yeah.
it was awesome. And as I've moved along from the experiences that were passion, I learned a lot. I had a lot of great experiences. It then evolved into something else. And then I'd say, you know what? This has been great, but now I'm being pulled somewhere else. It's not being pulled by anything else. It's almost like nature or spirit or God is pulling you
Mm-hmm.
towards what you want to become over a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we define ourselves by our jobs and all these things that are ridiculous. You're not your job. You you
Right.
go to the forest and like we're basically a bunch of advanced monkeys.
Right.
You
Sure.
meet like an ET and you'd be like, yeah, I'm in marketing. Oh, I'm in finance. You're like, what? Are you like a human? Like, I don't understand what you're saying to me. And this whole construct of society is pretty much fake. It is like the Matrix where we're going around in a commerce society. Why are we so much a commerce society? You just need clothes to wear so you're warm to protect yourself from the elements. We're so far away from what is natural. And
Mm-hmm.
I imagine having that experience in a cell where it's a natural way of living because it's so simple. It's so basic survival and so basic necessity. But from that ends up getting a clear mind. If it doesn't go the other way of seeing, okay, how do I get out of this? Like your friend from the Northern Tribe, like that's as natural way of living. And how do we merge, this technology and this advancement of a civilization without going away from what is natural? And it seems like the trend of all of these things that can improve our lives as a species, we're using them to kind of distort reality and distort our values. And I think that's where people get confused, because these industries based on profit are using psychological tactics to steer you in a way. So it has to be up to you to go in and set your own compass and to know your own direction. And I feel like that's what you're sharing in a very simple way, that it doesn't need to be fancy with glow sticks or whatever the case may be.
Right. Right. Because really what it comes down to is that whole thing of self-actualization or self-realization, where it's an unfolding of your true self, the person that you were born to be. And when you allow that to happen, that's when you reach fulfillment, and that's where happiness comes in. And you just create little spaces. Like, for example, yourself, you were blessed, able to pursue that wonderful passion of snowboarding, which is just incredible when you're able to follow your dream, or training with Shaolin monks. That's incredible. That's a wonderful experience. People, if they could just make even a tiny sliver of the day where they're connecting with something that they really love, that's enough to pry that door open. And for myself, I love nature. And in Thai prison, it was all around us because we were living in a swamp. Bangkok prison is built in a swamp. And so there was all kinds of creatures. They had these canals crisscrossing the prison, and they were filled with snakes and kind of mean snapping turtles and frogs. And I mean, it was crazy. It was like all this stuff, all this life we're surrounded by. But you can engage with it, and nature is there to be engaged with. And so this riot of plant and animal life that we were surrounded by, you can develop a relationship. And it's just like the animals and plants that surround our homes. We don't connect with them, but it's easy to do that. You could turn your own home into a nature preserve just by not cutting things, opening a water source, like leaving a faucet on drip, or having a fish bowl, having a little wash basin, if you will, with water in it for animals, and turning off your lights at night. And that is enough to attract wildlife. Now, if you want to go the whole hog, that's not really difficult either, where you get out the invasive plant species, plant some plant species native to your region, and now you're going to attract some real wildlife to your little space. And before you know it, if you're quiet and you're still, you can spend a little time every evening and get to know the animals and plants that live in your neighborhood, and they are your neighbors. And that's a tremendous change from the mechanistic world that we live in, to realize that there's other intelligences, there's other things that exist around us that we don't acknowledge. But it doesn't have to be that. It can be anything. But you want to connect. You need to connect. And that is where it begins. And that unfolding of your true self, that reordering of your priorities, that shift in your life is really what is vital. And it just takes that first couple of steps, because the next thing you know, it's like a reinforcing cycle, a virtuous cycle. The more that you do that, the happier your life becomes, the more fulfilled you are. And you realize, wow, I have devoted my whole life to nonsense. I have been chasing this dream I've been sold that is a nightmare. And when you awaken from that, now you're beginning what you might call enlightenment or higher consciousness, where you realize that all of these things are available to you, that there's a tremendous amount of power in that. And you achieve self-empowerment. You free yourself from all of the chains and traps that we are trapped in the West, that keep us following a path that I would call false.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, as of recent, I've been trying to figure out, the definition of like higher consciousness or enlightenment, right? And right now, I think one of the ideas around that is just designing life based on what you want to do and more freedom. And so if you're kind of like feeling like you're a prisoner and it's got to be this one way and this one job and this one thing and there's no other way, well, that's probably not true. But when you go and reflect and redefine things and reorganize, you realize that you actually can start to shift things in a way that you would prefer. And I like what you said also about, taking those first steps, because I think that the universe is going to support you. It's going to help you, because you also touched about like the animals and things like that. We live in this culture where it's just like, get out of here, rat, get out of here, stupid bird. I'm like, where is the bird? Where do you think it lives? What I mean? Where do you think these things live? Why do you think that you're better than that? Because there's a wall there. You know what I mean? If something happens, these walls are going to go down, those critters are going to get in, and you're going to be gone. They're probably going to be fine because they live in harmony with the environment. It's so we don't want to engage with that. Like it's like, it's not a part of life. Or we're kind of like when you were sharing the story about nobody seeing you, it's like we're shutting that whole bits of information off. And just, recently I had a daughter, and I've heard this said before. I've noticed babies, right? But I never, I was like, wasn't like a big, huge baby lover. Like people are like,
Uh-huh.
oh, look at the baby. I don't really care about that. I care about my baby now, but I was never one of those people. Everywhere is babies now.
Mhm.
Everywhere I look, oh my God, I couldn't see more babies. And
Right.
it's opening that field of information, because now my body is probably recognizing you have one of these. And so you need to be picking up information about how to, support this thing and how to do those things. And so when we open up our focus to our environment, that's spiritual. That's
Mhm.
higher consciousness, in the sense that we're getting all this information. But the thing is that we equate this like higher consciousness or this thing with this success, and it has to be material. Oh,
Mhm.
well, you have you're like those again, the hill tribe people will be like, oh, well, that's not success. Well, they're probably more whatever you would perceive to be enlightened or higher conscious than any billionaire on the planet. They would
Mhm.
know how to survive. They're super connected to nature. They're probably more spiritual than any spiritual leader, like the Pope.
Mhm.
Way more spiritual than me or somebody who runs a spiritual podcast. Because they're living it, they're being it. It's simple, and it sounds like they're doing it in their own way. And so we all have option here to create our life, and
Mhm.
we all have the power, we all have the universal spark, we all have source, spirit, all that in each and every one of us, and it's in animals, and it's in plants, and it's in all of us.
Mhm.
So what do we do with that? How do we navigate? And what you're speaking about is the simplest idea of just really connecting with what's true to you, and
Mhm.
trying to let go of the stuff that doesn't serve you, and get connected, and let go of those like false things that are kind of like there's a term for it, but it's kind of like the golden calf theory, or something
Mhm.
where you get it and then it just vanishes. These
Mhm.
false exciting things. It's just like, you don't want those. You guys get what I'm talking about, I hope.
Yeah.
So what I want to ask, man, this has been just wonderful, super insightful and empowering. And everything that you said was just so grounded, and put in a way with a level of experience that if anybody could imagine what that's like, it's so intense.
Thank you
I'm
for
just
that.
imagining it. But is there anything that you wish that I had asked, or that you would like to discuss before we close it out?
The only thing that I would just like to leave listeners with, that I think is really super important, and there's almost a movement of it now. You do see a lot of it, is that emphasis on kindness, and it is a big growing movement. But I think that people, that's really where it begins, and just be kind to yourself a little bit. Be gentle with yourself, and realize that, we're not kind to ourselves. We don't take care of ourselves. And the same thing is true with your loved ones, the people that are most important to you. Is just be a little bit kinder, a little bit more compassionate with them. And that's the road to take, because when you begin to give love, that's when it flows into your life. And I know that it's easy to get lost in discussions, metaphysics of it, and all these different things, where people kind of go off on I don't know, they go off in tangents, if you will. But to keep it really grounded and really simple, I would really urge people to start by just doing some very simple kindnesses for themselves, things that they really love. Bring those into your life. The people that you're closest to you, your partner, your nearest and dearest, do some kindnesses for them, just out of generosity, with no expectation. And that begins a cycle that is absolutely wonderful. And I think that there's a power in that that's immense, that it unlocks a wonderful doorway. And so I would just urge people, if you can't find anything else, just focus once a day on doing something kind for yourself, and maybe doing kindness to somebody that you love, and let that be kind of a guide for you. And I don't think you could ever go wrong with that. And so that's something that is really simple, that anybody could do, that is transformative. But I just would like to leave listeners with that, because I know a lot of people seem lost in today's society, and they get caught up in things that are really painful and negative. And just doing a kindness for yourself and your loved ones, and you're not going to go wrong. That's the right way. That's the right path.
Beautifully said. And I'm so grateful you said that. I know that you listen to a few podcasts, but it reminds me of this quote. And I looked it up, and some people say the Buddha didn't say this. I don't know if he said it or not, but the quote is, and I like the quote, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the universe, deserves your love and affection."
Mhm.
And a good friend of mine, who's one of my spiritual teachers, I'd say, is David Lonebear, and he has a 20,000 year history of the star teachings. And the
Mm,
first three of these teachings are kindness, compassion, and happiness. And
mm,
so often he'll talk about kindness to yourself first, and
mhm,
how important that is to engage as a society, and how challenging it can be to be just so
mm,
hard on yourself all the time. And the best spiritual teaching that I've ever heard was from him. And he said, do 3 kind acts a day, go out of your
mhm,
way to do it, and don't tell
mm,
anyone. And
mm.
he
Beautiful.
yeah, and so that's what you're speaking about there. And so when people listen to the podcast and I ask them to support, say the best thing that you can do is one kind act in the community. If this is doing anything, if I think about, is it like, am I speaking the truth? Like, I'm not sure what's going on here. You know what I mean? I'm trying my best. Maybe in 2 years it was like all wrong, and I was like doing everything wrong, and like it could be, I was like, oh no. But I try, and I'm like, you know what? If you, through this podcast, and listen to all that, but then do something kind in your community, then it was working at least a bit.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah,
And and
absolutely.
and it's an action. We go right out of theory to action, and it's so
Mm,
simple. And that's the way, that's probably how, again, that tribe lived, is just they take care of
mhm,
each other. It's just a way of life. It's not expected. You just show up to show up. And we need to get back to that grounded nature, that spirituality in action, just to be a good human. I don't care if your chakras were aligned before you did the nice thing. They could have been totally out of whack and you gave me a hand. Totally cool, man. Let it slide. Thank you so much. And so let's focus on the meat and potatoes. And so just an absolute beautiful ending. And I'm so glad that you said that. Where can people find more about you? And is there anything that you'd like to add on to that last statement that I had shared?
Sure. I'm really interested in engaging in conversation. And so anybody that's a listener, I'm really accessible. You just go to lastinghappiness.net and post a comment, and you'll hear back from me. And I love criticism. A lot of people don't like it or feel upset by it, but I love it, because what it does is it's revelatory. It gives you insights and it helps you change for the better. And I love that. And so if there's anybody that is interested in this, go to lastinghappiness.net and post a comment somewhere. There's a bunch of stuff there. There's a bunch of interview questions that I've answered. There's a rather deeper biography there with some video stuff. Bunch of neat stuff there on the site. And of course, the book is available also. But I would love to have a conversation with listeners. And so anybody that wants to kind of question or has anything that they want to know more about, please engage. And I'd love to engage with listeners on that.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for your work. Thank you for surviving that crazy ordeal and living to tell us about it, and share those simple philosophies. And then just actually, take the time to work towards it, because it's one thing to figure out where you'd like to go, and then it's another thing to walk it each and every day. And I see
Yes,
you doing that. So thank you for doing that. I appreciate everything you shared tonight, and the work you're doing. So thanks for coming on the show, man.
absolutely. Thank you very much for having me, Matt. It was a pleasure and a privilege.
Awesome, man. Well, we'll be in touch. Thanks, guys, for listening. We'll see you later.
All right. Good deal. Thank you.